Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are so excited to welcome Bob Cohn back for his program every other month. We have a lot of people coming today for On the Record. It's a very interesting topic. It is going to be about the controversy over the Holocaust book Moss, which was recently banned by a Virginia school board, and the Whoopi Goldberg remarks on The View. So I know everybody is very interested in this topic. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our expert and facilitator, Bob Cohn, and let him start the discussion.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for being such a wonderfully helpful and supportive volunteer to make sure this is all handled properly. And I know Judy Oliver handles other programs through Fell Merowitz. And I'm honored that Harvey Gerstein, the original co-founder of Fell program, is on the call as well. What I thought I would do is, and I think the fact that we have 75 people who have signed up officially and others who tried to or had to drop out at the last minute, we usually get around 58, which is a pretty good number also, but this indicates a large degree of interest. And I know most of you have probably read the column on the Jewish Light Online, but just in case, and also as a way of reinforcing what I was trying to say, I'm going to read out what I wrote and then open up the floor to discussions on the Whoopi Goldberg Mouse book controversy, and then give you a preview of what might lie ahead for future classes. So here I go, reading. The headline is Proof That Mice Can Roar. You remember the movie The Mouse That Roared a number of years ago, where a country decided that it was the only way they could make their budget for the country was to declare war on the United States. And pointing out that after Germany and Japan were destroyed at the end of World War II because of Nazism and Japanese militarism and fascism, that they decided to go forward with a post-war reality. And there's a tremendous amount of interest in what's going on. So I'm going to just start reading what I wrote the other day. The recent and extraordinarily dumb decision by a Tennessee school board to ban Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning Holocaust-themed graphic novel, Mouse, M-A-U-S, from its library is a reminder that mice cartoons have grown way beyond Mickey, Minnie, and even Mighty Mouse. By the way, this is part of a series in the Jewish Life that I'm doing called Cohn's Comic Corner, because Jews have had a tremendous influence in Hollywood. Neil Gabler's book was How the Jews Invented Hollywood. And every week there's a new book or another major article on the Jewish connections to comic books and comic strips. If it weren't for those once lowly items of literature, the movie industry might have gone completely bankrupt. But all these superhero movies, Spider-Man and Batman, et cetera, raked in so much money that it was the movie theaters worldwide were able to recoup their losses. So that's worth mentioning. Mouse is based on Art Spiegelman's often painful interviews with his father, Wladek, a Polish-Jewish Auschwitz survivor. Spiegelman's father's searing testimony is illustrated in comic book form, whereby Jews are depicted as mice and Nazis are drawn as cats, an audacious use of the Tom and Jerry cartoon cat and mouse theme as a filter through which to see that which is beyond visualization. I mean, sometimes things are too harsh to face directly. You have to kind of avert your eyes because it's so horrible that you have to use another way of getting that information across. And it ended up being an ingenious technique. Spiegelman and his father both suffered horribly from survivor's guilt. The overwhelming depression that led to Spiegelman's mother, Anja Zilberberg Spiegelman, to take her own life in 1968. She had been haunted by endless nightmares about her time in Auschwitz and just literally couldn't take it anymore and took her own life. Mouse was the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize in a special new category in 1992. So that was an unprecedented degree of acceptance by the Pulitzer Prize Committee. They didn't have a category for graphic novels at the time. Now, by the way, you can pick up the New York Times Book Review, which is the Bible of book reviews and find a whole section devoted to graphic novels. Last Tuesday, Whoopi Goldberg was suspended from her talk show, The View, on ABC TV for 2 weeks. And she had issued an apology after she said, quote, "The Holocaust was not about race. It was about man's inhumanity to man." Goldberg's appalling statement was roundly denounced, and her apology was necessary, if slightly inadequate, or depending on your view of it, totally inadequate. The Nazis considered the Nordic people, so-called Aryans, to be the master race, and the Jews were described as an inferior race. And so, but the Nazis added to the whole anti-Semitic narrative was that the Jews are a lowly and inferior race as opposed to the master race, blonde and blue-eyed, slim, idealized master race of the Nazis. As to what's dumb about the Tennessee School Board decision to ban a book published decades ago, there are many reasons, not the least of which is the fact that book burning was one of the early practices of Nazi Germany. There are chilling images of smiling Hitler youth gleefully burning books by Freud, Heine, and Proust in order to de-Judaize Germany. In addition, the banning of books at schools and libraries has in the past swept up books like The Diary of Anne Frank or Anne Frank's stories from the Annex, that because it contains references to Anne's sexual awakening. Bans have also removed Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird from shelves, despite the fact that her novel was among the very best American books ever published, according to every possible survey of book reviewers and critics. A contrastingly upbeat use of a Jewish mouse is in, quote unquote, An American Tale, Steven Spielberg's animated cartoon film about Fievel Mouskowitz, a tiny rodent separated from his Russian Jewish family as the ship docks in New York harbor. Fievel finds that the streets of the Lower East Side are not paved with cheese as his parents had hoped. Fievel becomes street smart as he faces criminal gangs, sweatshops, the formation of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and the different forces at work towards assimilating the Jewish population, which was largely centered in New York's Lower East Side. I hope some of you, like me, have had an opportunity to visit the Tenement Museum in New York, and they have intact apartments looking exactly as they did when the Jews were the majority population in that famous neighborhood. I reviewed both Mouse and An American Tale favorably at the time of their release, and again in 1991 when sequels came out. In American Tale 2, Fievel Has West, which is kind of similar to the movie about for the Frisco Kid with Gene Wilder. Mouse 2, A Survivor's Tale. Click to read the 1996 and 1999 reviews. You can, if you find this review online, my remarks that I'm reading right now, you'll find clicks where you can bring up the 2 reviews that I wrote at the time. Here are 2 heavily contrasted stories, one about the dream of America and the other about the nightmare of Auschwitz, both illustrating their divergent themes through cartoon depictions of mice. The decision of the short-sighted school board in Tennessee, which, if you'll remember, is the same state that banned the teaching of evolution. Remember that great play and later a movie called Inherit the Wind, in which it was the so-called Scopes Monkey trial. Spencer Tracy played the character based on Clarence Darrow defending the teaching of evolution. And there was a character who played William Jennings Bryan. It was a very famous trial. The banning of Mouse had the opposite effect across America. Amazon reports that the book jumped to the top of its bestseller list. Talk about poetic justice. Sometimes we get proof that mice can indeed roar. So having shared with you again my take on it, and it hasn't really changed since I published it, let me open up the floor to questions or comments and see what you have to ask or contribute to the conversation. You can wave to get attention.
Yeah, it's Linda.
Linda Kessler. You can go ahead.
Thanks.
Hi, Linda.
Thanks, Bob. I did read your article. Oh,
Good.
I got this weird phone in my face. What's that about? I don't know. Anyway, can you see me, hear me? Because I have a phone.
Perfectly. Yes, indeed.
Oh, okay. Anyway, the article, of course, was wonderful. But here's my thing. I read many things. I heard about the Whoopi Goldberg issue immediately. And for me, first of all, I know about Whoopi for many, many years. She named herself Goldberg because she has a strong feeling of connection with the Jewish people. I don't think there is an anti-Semitic bone in that woman's body. She has supported the Jewish community for many, many years. And what I feel, and others who I've discussed it with feel, that her comment about it being inhumanity to man, which I totally agree with, there is no dispute that it was inhumanity to man, was her thinking as a Black person, African-American, however you want to say it, was the race of Black versus white. And in her mind, Jews are white. And so the Germans were white. That's where she came on with a white on white issue. It wasn't because she was being anti-Semitic or diminishing the Holocaust. And so when everybody got so crazy and up in arms about how awful she was and how dare her, etc., I was like, what? What are you reacting like this for? And then, of course, then she went on and had a meeting with the ADL person who explained the whole thing and apologized. I mean, come on. I am, of course, you know how I feel about defending and standing up for Judaism on every level. I'm all involved on everything. But I think this was a very distorted reaction and blaming, as the social media tends to do about everything these days, without considering the source. And the woman is definitely not being anti-Semitic. And I don't think she should have been suspended for 2 weeks because of it. That's just my opinion.
Well, I appreciate, Linda, your comments very much. I agree with most of what you had to say. I think a lot of things that are interpreted as being anti-Semitic come not from a period of real anti-Semitism, but from ignorance as opposed to malice. I think the same could be said in some ways about the statement that attributed to Governor Parson, where he said that he would hope that his new health director would adhere to Jewish values, or rather Christian values, excuse my tongue. And I don't think in his heart of hearts, I have many problems with Governor Parson. That I could take up the rest of the program listing all of my concerns.
Yes.
I don't think in his heart of hearts, he really meant that as a pejorative against non-Christian people. It was just his way of expressing his own values. And we often throw around terms like tikkun olam and Jewish values, et cetera, et cetera. And who is the ultimate arbiter to decide where you draw the line on a complicated case? I think Oliver Wendell Holmes, great Supreme Court Justice, was asked, in a difficult case, Mr. Justice, where do you draw the line? His answer was, you draw it in the right place. And the Supreme Court's job is to find out where that right place is. So it is a complicated issue. And certainly Whoopi Goldberg would not have adopted the name Goldberg if she had any degree of anti-Semitism. In fact, it is another cliche that is overused as a teachable moment. And the fact that this class itself is an example of a healthy conversation generating from this whole controversy. So,
well, that's one of the things that I so appreciate about it and feel that she's made a great contribution, because she brought this out, and the expansive conversation from so many levels has really been, I find, very enlightening to some people and helpful, but I don't like the level of blame in a distorted way for it. And
very well put. I could add also the idea of Jews being a race. The way we used to define race was that, there's 3 to 5 major categories of races in the world: Caucasian or Caucasoid or white. Then you had they used to call it Mongoloid, but I don't like that term for Asian. and Negroid for Black people. There are also South Island people. I remember when I was in college and first got active with Hillel and other Jewish groups, that we were discouraged from referring to Jews as race because there are Jews found among all of the major races. You have Asian American Jews, large numbers of them, as a matter of fact, some through intermarriage and some from their upbringing from childhood. There was a thriving Jewish community in China itself. There are ancient connections between the Ethiopian Jews, they used to be called Falashas, who trace their ancestry to the marriage of King Solomon to the Queen of Sheba. And so we are found in all races. And at the same time, the Nazis racialized anti-Semitism. You could not convert out of being born into a race. That's a genetic reality. So they exploited that ignorance for their own benefit.
Tanner Eicher, I had a discussion with him about this, and I find he has a brilliant mind. And he, after much conversation, basically said something that really stood out for me. He said, rather than us saying Judaism is not a race, it would be best to say Judaism cannot be a race because there are so many different races that practice Judaism.
That's a good one.
That was a good one.
Tanner Eicher is a brilliant guy and a very good to consult on all kinds of issues. Other questions, comments, observations?
Well, I think that I definitely agree with Linda that Whoopi Goldberg, it was not anti-Semitic at all. I think she was thinking of, as a Black person, that when she was saying about, well, if I was walking down with my Jewish white friend and a Ku Klux Klan member came upon us, she'd run. They wouldn't know the person, the white, was Jewish or not. So I do agree that she was not, anti-Semitic at all. I don't think she should have been suspended, but I think that ABC had to do it because they had to show that, but I do agree one thing is that you have to be careful when you're talking about the Holocaust. You have to be careful about the words you use. And even though I don't think she meant it in any mean way, she's on TV and she needed to be careful what she said. So I agree that the ABC director said that it had to be, it was a teachable moment that she needed to kind of reflect a little bit and be off for a couple of weeks or whatever. But I don't necessarily know she should have been suspended, but that's just my belief. So
how do I say
that? Going along with that, that line of thought,
we'll get you next.
We have to put into the time of events and the words used. Hitler used the word race.
Right.
To survivors, this is crucial. So yes, right. Jews are not a race. Whoopi is correct. It is man's inhumanity against man. But you must put everything in the reference of the time. For instance, people who want to ban reading Huckleberry Finn because of the words used there. It was a book written in a specific time where those words were okay. And
right.
Be needed, and this is what I hope she's reflecting on, needed to put in context the term race within the period of the Holocaust.
All right, somebody else wanted to get.
May I make a reflection on this, Dr. Terry Gardner? My comment is, I'm just glad of the controversy that has been brought up over Whoopi. I don't care what she said, at least the public is aware that we have to know what's going on. Why aren't we being concerned about these idiots like Josh Hawley, who's members of militias, who's anti-Semitic, who's anti-democracy? We need to bring that out into the open also. Let's get rid of a lot of this stuff. I'm trying to figure out how to join anti-defamation leagues or whatever is the most vocal to merely state that we have a major problem in this country that's going to grow into anti-Semitism. We have camps, dissident person camps that are still open and ready to be occupied. We need all this out in the public again. We also need to stop using the term fight when we're talking about fighting for rights. We must say we must adjust and get away from the adversaries, because fight is the term that Trump used. And if he has to defend himself, he'll say it's a common term. That's all he was doing, is saying the same thing that everybody else is saying. Goodbye.
Oh, yeah, some good points were made there. I agree with most of what you had to say. I disagree with some. I'm not going to get into a debate with people in this conversation, but I think it's healthy that we're having this conversation.
Yes.
And we need to have more of them in a calm atmosphere like this. It's Erev Shabbat, when we should have our thoughts organized in a constructive way. The Anti-Defamation League, of course, is the gold standard of combating bigotry. It originated in 1913 to combat anti-Jewish stereotypes in movies and plays. It's something we're dealing with right now. Also, even using the term Holocaust or making references to Hitler is the third rail now of human discourse, because it churns up so many thoughts and feelings. And it's also, Holocaust references can be used for evil purposes, to compare vaccine mandate records to yellow stars and outrageous things at that time. And at the same time, when something presents itself, like Vladimir Putin organizing 140,000 troops, Russian troops on the border with Belarus, and indications that he was planning a plant the flag basis for coming in and invading, if we don't make reference to the fact that Hitler invaded Poland and used the identical tactics, then we're not really being completely honest with ourselves. So those are some interesting things that you put on the table. We also have the cancel culture, where anything and everything that is said or pronounced in any setting can be the subject of litigation, or people leading boycotts and so forth. And I believe that in the expression originally attributed to Mao in China, let 100 flowers bloom and 1,000 schools of thought contend, which is a beautiful statement, except he didn't live up to it. We're seeing that playing out in China as we speak. Other questions, comments, observations?
Oh, yes. As an individual, I'm a retired airline captain, jet captain, retired physician, retired military, but those things don't concern Judaism. I am active in all those other things. We have got to stay open. We are intelligent people. We're active in almost every form of American life, and they're trying to crush us. They're trying to destroy us. I've also been a farmer. You know, it's Judaism now has to be open, not controversial, and part of American society.
Thank you so much, sir. Other comments?
Marilyn Alton.
This is Marilyn Alton. This is especially violent time against Jews. I think that's one of the reasons that Whoopi Goldberg was given a 2-week suspension. She misspoke, but she is certainly not anti-Semitic. She has no history of that whatsoever. She took a Jewish stage name. Yes, her mistake was not saying Jews are not a race. But as I said, I don't think she should have been suspended. Now, a professor said he hopes one day everyone in America will be seen as part of the human race. That is the human race. Are Jews a race, or would it apply that as a matter of law, customs, and the United States and Israel? They are both. Now, many feel Jews aren't a race. They are a religion, or a culture, or a heritage, or a tradition. And I tend to believe that. I mean, you ask the difference between race and religion or whatever. Now, the Nazis viewed the Jews, of course, just as a race, not just as a race, but as an inferior, dangerous one. And of course, as you know, they tried to eliminate Jews on precisely those grounds. But I don't think that Whoopi Goldberg should have been suspended. She gave an apology, but that's the age we live in now, that every single thing you say, everything, is scrutinized, you're suspended, you're banned. You can't seem to do anything or say anything today. Now, that is my opinion.
Well, very well expressed opinion, Marilyn. I agree with you 100%. I think sometimes in labor negotiations, we have something called a cooling off period. And I think in the immediate aftermath of the statement and the storm of controversy that was stirred up, that probably ABC, and I'm glad I didn't have to make the decision for them, felt they needed to do something to express their concerns about how this Whoopi Goldberg statements could be either interpreted or misinterpreted. And so the 2-week suspension was considered on their part an opportunity to cool things down and wait a while. It's not the end of her career, goodness knows. She's an Oscar-winning and Oscar-nominated, Emmy Award-winning actress. She has wonderful relations with Jews in the entertainment industry, and she can defend herself quite well. So, and again, I think even in my own teaching conversations, my thought processes when I'm teaching a class like this, but if I misspeak, I'll try to promptly make amends for it. And at the same time, I'm willing to be criticized harshly if somebody disagrees with me in a strong way. But this is a way we could get things discussed in a calm and collected way. Other questions, comments, observations?
This is Dottie Ellis. I totally agree with Marilyn, and I agree with the very first speaker. My mom used to say in a marriage, you pick your fights. I think we have picked a fight here mistakenly. I also think that ABC was wrong in suspending her, but I think ABC has a wonderful opportunity for a teaching moment here. And when she comes back to The View, it would be nice to have a little discussion like this. What is race? That's my opinion. I think we all overlook it because of the word Holocaust.
Yeah, speaking personally, I'm not a fan of The View in terms of its intellectual depth. And I did not watch that particular program as it unfolded. The few programs of The View that I have seen, I think they're long on gossip and short on intellectual background, but it has a good fan base and ABC has a right to put it on. Other people who have not as yet commented.
Bob, this is Harvey Schneider, and it's been my experience that many statements that we hear, such as the governor's statement and Whoopi's to a certain extent, and we've heard other statements, so-and-so was a good Christian. They're made out of a lack of sensitivity rather than with animus. And it's been my experience, one of the things that we as a Jewish community could do more of is to get out, make friends with people who are Christians, Muslims, and other religions. That's the best way of getting people to know you, to appreciate what you have to offer, and to become more sensitive to what they might say or do in the future.
Harvey, well said as always. Hold on a second, sir. Let me respond to Harvey. Harvey's comments are based on years of experience in leadership in things like the Interfaith Partnership. I serve with her on the American Jewish Committee Board, and he has a wise and calm reaction to various things and is in the vineyards of working with people in the Christian community, Catholics, Lutherans, evangelicals. There's a whole variety of them. It's not right to lump them all together in a single monolithic thought process any more than it is to say that Jews, the old idea of 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There are numerous opinions, but Harvey is consistently the voice of reason and figuring out how to find common ground instead of trying to figure out how to choose a divisive path. Linda, I'll get to you next. This gentleman wanted to add to his previous comments, so go ahead.
Well, it's just we have to go against the Fox News that's out there. They're not even a news station. They're entertainment, but they are putting them down. I don't mind what we said at all. It brings out to the U.S. public that there's a problem. Fox News, nobody's complaining about their idiocies.
Can I comment something here between black and white? Hitler had Star of David on every child, adult, to tell the difference. And all the people that you have neighbors, I'm a survivor. I lived in Berlin. And all the people that lived in these apartments, they all were for Hitler. And when they told the people, the authorities that there's a Jew living on that apartment, you're it. They catch up with you. So there is no thing as black and white. The black and white is here. In Germany at that time, we all had Star of David on our clothes. That's the only way you can tell if you're Jewish.
Yeah, that is very well said, sir. And I admire your candor under the circumstances to weigh in on this conversation. You speak with great authority, and the Holocaust can be exploited for the wrong reasons, just as Christianity can be invoked with ignorance as opposed to with wisdom. So in wisdom hast thou made them all. We need to have a variety of opinions and to express them respectfully, and you contributed greatly to this conversation, sir. Other people who have not as yet spoken.
I'm
yes,
going to jump in, Ruth Stoloff, and then David.
Go ahead.
Am I on? Okay. Unmuted and all? Okay. I was born in Africa. I've lived in America for over 30 years. I consider myself an African American. Yes, I am white. And another thing I'd like to add, I am Torah literate. My late husband and I learned Torah in Hebrew, word for word. And I'd just like to, I agree with the first ladies that appeared about Whoopi. 100% agree that Judaism is not a race. It's abominable that we Jews consider ourselves a race. And I just want to add just one thing that I heard. May have been on Fox News or some conservative. Yes, some of us are conservative listening into your program. It was Morgan Freeman interview with Chris Wallace's father. I wasn't here. I just heard something he said. He said, Morgan, when interviewed by Wallace, said regarding Black History Month, he says, you whites don't have a White History Month. Jews don't have a Jewish History Month. And that really hit home to me, what Morgan Freeman said.
Very good. Remember Tom Lehrer, the very famous satirist, the Harvard professor who had a song about National Brotherhood Week, National Be Kind to someone, extend a helping hand to someone you can't stand. Be thankful that it doesn't last all year. And we do have Black History Month. Also, there are atheists and agnostic Jews. There are ultra-Orthodox Jews, so-called, Haredi they're called. So that Judaism is a religion, but you can still be Jewish according to the strict interpretation of halakha or Jewish law. You are a Jew if your mother at the time of your birth was Jewish. That automatically makes you Jewish throughout the entire, even if you convert to another religion. There was a fellow who, except in Israel, when you want to make aliyah and use the law of return, you have to have a Jewish mother or have not converted to another religion. But this is an issue that needs a lot of unpacking and a lot of observations. Another very nice comment, which I appreciate. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
David, there you go.
Hi, Bob. As always, I appreciate learning from you, as I have since I was in your class in religious school all those years ago.
That's the greatest reward a teacher can have, David, is to be recalled by a kid who sat in the third row in the second seat when I was teaching at Sheramuth Temple for 44 years. So that means a great deal to me. So thank you so much. And you're a good student still.
In any event, I think it's important to remember it wasn't just Hitler or the Nazis who said that Jews weren't white, that we were a different race. But white supremacists continue to say, continue to consider Jews not white. it's sort of interesting because, back when there were signs at country clubs, no Jews allowed, we weren't considered white in this country, but over time, most people in this country now consider Jews white. It's that history that makes it so important to correct what Whoopi Goldberg said. Did she say it maliciously? I don't believe so, but nevertheless, language matters. And that's why it's important what Jonathan did. Very similarly with our governor, words matter. And do I believe that he was intending to disparage or downplay the contributions of non-Christians? No, I don't think so. But when you are in government, you are not supposed to be advancing one religion over another. And so I think it was important that his statement be corrected and that he be called out for it.
Well said, David. Couldn't have said it better than myself. Appreciate that. I want to share some, looking towards the next couple of classes, and we can still take more questions or comments on this, although I think we've had a pretty good discussion. There's a book review in the Wall Street Journal of December the 28th, 2021, a book of a biography of Oliver Cromwell, The Making of Oliver Cromwell, a plain man, warts and all. You often hear that expression, paint me warts and all. And that was attributed to Oliver Cromwell, who was a very prominent British politician. He led the parliamentarian revolt against the reign of King Charles I, and he was a very complicated guy. And I'll just read a few paragraphs which can apply to my other overarching theme: what makes great leaders great, and why do some leaders fail? And do we talk about leaders in exalted, breathless praise as hagiography, like you write about a saint, or do you paint them warts and all? So I'll start reading a few paragraphs that I think are relevant to this whole topic. Great political leaders, with a tiny number of exceptions, are complicated people who possess both appalling flaws and magnificent virtues. I'm going to interject. Think of Winston Churchill, whose voice carried the free world through World War II, spectacularly bad decisions during various aspects of his life. Oliver Cromwell was not one of those exceptions. He sought and relished the demise of political enemies. He hogged glory for military feats rightly belonging to other people, perpetrated wartime atrocities, and equated God's will with his own intentions. But he also undermined a class system that elevated birth over ability, dealt a death blow to the divine right monarchy, and forced the English nation to reckon with the reality of religious and, by extension, political diversity. He was, Ronald Hutton writes in The Making of Oliver Cromwell, courageous, devout, resolute, principled, intelligent, eloquent, able, adaptable, and dedicated, but also self-seeking, unscrupulous, definitely not somebody to be taken simply at his word. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I remember when Franklin Roosevelt died, one of the earliest world events that I recalled, 5 or 6 years old, April 12th, 1945. And when this kid in our neighborhood was running through the streets, like Paul Revere saying, President Roosevelt is dead, President Roosevelt is dead. Many of us thought that God had fallen from the sky. And I remember when Harry Truman was being sworn in, there was a picture of him getting the oath of office on the front page of the Post-Dispatch. And my mom of blessed memory said, well, Harry Truman is that bum who went broke in Kansas City running a men's clothing store. And he's a cheap politician. He won't amount to anything at all. Harry Truman was the man from Missouri who recognized the state of Israel 11 minutes after it was founded. Richard Nixon, who was justifiably accused of all kinds of wrongdoing and had to resign his office to avoid impeachment and removal. He was also the president who provided life-saving equipment, drawing down on our NATO war material to provide Israel with that assistance during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So I hope to try to take a balanced approach to these various issues and these various leaders. All right, that's my plug for the coming class. Let me hear from any other questions that you would like. And by the way, if you're not able to get online during this call, which will end at around noon, send an email to Susan or to me directly, and I'll respond via emails. B Cohn, C-O-H-N, at stljewishlight.org. Still have time for some more questions or observations.
Carrie, you need to unmute yourself.
Hello. Hi, Myra.
Yes. As far as the Jews being considered a race, I took 23andMe and I'm like 98.9% Ashkenazi Jewish. My husband the same. And most of the people I know that are Jewish have about the same statistic as far as being Jewish. I know that Jews were put in certain areas in Europe and they were not allowed to go outside those areas, so they mated with those who were around them, and that's one reason. But the Jewish people have always been connected to the Torah, and that's what makes us unique. We are a people. Whether we're a specific race, I don't know if race is something to do with features, color of the skin. It's a confusing issue. So I can see where Whoopi Goldberg was coming from. But the Jews are definitely different. They're a people that's always been connected to God and Torah. And so I don't know if we're considered a race or not, but it's something to consider.
Very well said. The majority of Jews in the United States are descended from the Ashkenazi or Central and Eastern European ancestry, but there is probably statistically as many or more what they call Mizrahi Jews, Jews from former Arab and Muslim countries. There used to be 800,000 Jews living throughout the Middle East and Arab countries. And after the formation of Israel and in the following years, many of them made the Aliyah to come to the state of Israel. Ironically, one of the largest remaining Jewish populations in the majority Muslim country is in Iran. There are about 15 to 20,000 Jews living in Iran. Many of them had left after the Ayatollah took over from the Shah, who had a good relationship with the Jewish community. We also have the reality of the Ethiopian Jews. 200,000 or so of them have made Aliyah to Israel. There are other African tribes that trace their ancestry. There are at least two separate Jewish communities in India, the second largest country in population in the world. So we have to be careful about how we describe them. And Myra, your interpretation, I believe, is entirely correct.
Well, also in many of the Muslim countries, I had to review passports to asylees to have their physicals done. And I noticed on those passports, Jews are listed as a race, not as Caucasian or whatever. So
interesting point. I also want to interject too. Thank you for that comment. That in the Soviet Union, Jews were considered one of the 117, not a race, not a religion, but a nationality. And so when a Jew won the Soviet equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, the Order of Lenin, of the 117 nationalities in the Soviet Union, Jews by far exceeded all of the other 116 nationalities in terms of the numbers of medals that were won. They had obviously an added interest in defeating the Nazis. So that's an interesting point. Again, we're called all kinds of things, some of them accurate, some of them inaccurate. There's a book, I think his name is by Charles Silverman, called A Peculiar People. And we're going to probably keep defining who is a Jew forever, because we are a complicated, we're partly a family. That's a good way of expressing, like an extended family. And we have infinite varieties of people being Jewish. So, good point.
Well, in Israel also, I was Aliyah in the early 70s, and then it was Sephardic and Ashkenazi. And boy, there was a lot of dislike amongst the two at that time. I was there in the last few years, and it seems to be mostly ironed over and smoothed out now.
Yeah, it was a very, they used to talk about the social gap between the Ashkenazi and Sephardic communities. Of course, we've had Sephardic presidents of Israel through the years. Navon is one of them. And that social gap has been reduced, but it took a while for that to happen. Other questions? There are all kinds of good books about this, the various waves of immigration from other parts of the world to this country. There's a book, Stephen Birmingham, who wrote the book called Our Crowd, which is all about the German Jewish community, so-called, and how well they assimilated into the American culture. We also have, he wrote a book called The Grandees. The original Jewish immigrants to this country were from Spain and Portugal. As a matter of fact, the first Jews who arrived in what is now the United States came from Recife, Brazil, in order to escape the Portuguese Inquisition. And they presented themselves to Peter Stuyvesant, who was the governor of the territory of New Amsterdam. And at first he didn't want to take them in, but the Royal Dutch Tea Company said, we definitely want you to admit them to this country. Linda, did you have a question? Or is it?
Marilyn Alton has a question.
Okay, I agree, if I understand this correctly, that the Torah said every human being is created equally in the image of God. And there's only one race, and that's the human race. And that makes sense to me. I agree with that. And Bob, one last thing. If you do have a moment, could you just give me your opinion if you think certain books should be banned? Because we didn't touch on that. I don't know if you even want to get to that topic.
Very good question. I'm on the side of being a First Amendment advocate of free expression, but I do think there are certain literatures that should be banned. Obviously, and the Supreme Court has upheld banning things like child pornography and things of that sort that are inappropriate for certain age groups. Then you get into areas like banning the Diary of Anne Frank, because she talks candidly in her diary about getting sexual feelings for Peter Van Dam while they were hidden in that annex. I don't think that should be banned. I think, but one has to be careful. There are certain books that are really inappropriate for children and should not be made available, but it can be abused to eliminate all kinds of good literature from the shelves. Someone earlier on made a reference to Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn and the books of Twain, which use the N word, which again is never excusable, even in the past context, but which at the time of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn were part of the general vernacular. So I'm a former member of the ACLU board. I served 2 terms. I'm regretful that the ACLU is not as focused on, although it did enter into a litigation on the restoration of the book Mouse, but they've gotten into areas they used to be equally defend people on the left and the right, their right to their freedom of expression. So I hope that answer seemed understandable. And again, for the most part, books should not be banned, but there are certain books that are at a level, and books that would actually foment hatred from one group against the other, I don't think should be on the shelves of our schools.
Thank you. I agree.
Can I comment?
Please.
Okay. I want to comment about the DNA tests that many take through, Ancestry and et cetera.
Right.
And yes, many people are coming up with, predominantly 98% Ashkenazi Jews and so on. But that still doesn't constitute a race. When Jewish people marry Jewish people and continuously do that, we create a heredity. We inherit the DNA. That doesn't mean that all Jewish people are part of a race. And so I just wanted to, for example, myself, I'm Jewish. My father's family and ancestry was Eastern European. My mother's was Sephardi from Spain, fleeing before the Inquisition ended up in Sweden. So I'm Jewish, but I'm not part of a race. And because when you continuously marry Jewish, you're going to get a hereditary DNA.
Very well said, Lynn. I'm glad you brought that up. There's another aspect of the same issue of the so-called Jewish genetic diseases. There are 11 or 12 diseases that are found almost exclusively among Ashkenazi Jews, including Tay-Sachs, familial dysautonomia, various illnesses of that kind, because as you noted, at least indirectly, Jews tended to in marriage, and that sometimes produces children who are exceptionally gifted, and other times they're born with very serious birth defects. And it's important to have that knowledge, but not to extrapolate from that. Well, there's Sheldon, glad to see you. From that Jews are a race unto themselves.
Good to see you, Bob.
I have a comment
it's good to see
along those lines. Doctor,
let me be sure Sheldon is finished.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, Bob, I want to go back to a
Let
point
Sheldon talk.
Can you hear me? I want to come back to a point that you made about that there may be circumstances in which books can be banned because they are hurtful. Well, that's the point that many racists are making now in terms of the efforts of those who are supporting critical race theory, of getting material on the shelves to talk about the evils of slavery, the crimes in Reconstruction. And there are those who say they shouldn't be on the library because our children might be offended by it. And you know what I say? Tough toenails. Everything should be everything needs to be available. And if it offends you, too bad.
Appreciate Sheldon's observations. I always have great respect for his views, whether I agree with them or not. And I agree with at least 98% of them. And the other 2%, I'm usually wrong. So I have to have great respect for it. Again, I believe in, matter of fact, I have a biography of Hugo L. Black, who was appointed to the US Supreme Court. That'll be a topic of a future discussion. He refused to look at any printed material at all, ever. If it was in print, he would not look at it. You could say, he said, the First Amendment about freedom of speech doesn't have any ifs, ands, or whereases in it. So no matter how obnoxious or how evil it might seem, it should not be banned by the government. So that's an interesting point that, Supreme Court justices are all over the ballpark in their views. And there's some who are strict constructionists, literalists, et cetera. And that's another topic among many others that we will share. Who has a closing comment? Who hasn't spoken before?
David and Marilyn both have comments. We can take those last two.
Okay, should I? Two things. First, about the banning of books. Just as with movies, we have a rating system as to what age a certain movie is appropriate. The same thing can easily be done with books, and books can be studied at a specific appropriate age. And that's all I'll say about that. I agree the books need to be on those bookshelves, but there's an appropriate time and place for them.
Well said, Marilyn. I used to go to the University City Public Library when I was at Delmar Harvard Grade School. And later on, they would have a room off to the side with a locked cabinet that had various books that were restricted from children. One of them was The Secret History of University City, which is all about Mr. Lewis, who was the founder of University City, who apparently had some shady business dealings, and they didn't want to embarrass the city by putting that on the general shelf. It can be abused like anything else. Mm-hmm. Very good comment, Marilyn, as always.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing regarding these different DNA tests, I think the majority of doctors now, one of the questions that's asked when you're a new patient, do you have Ashkenazic Jewish, are you
of descent?
Are you from, yeah. And it's so important exactly for what you were talking about, the diseases, Tay-Sachs, et cetera. And it was interesting because my kids, as they were getting older and all of a sudden they were being asked these questions and they were in their upper teens, the doctor wanted to know, am I Ashkenazi? Do I have Ashkenazic ancestry? And said yes. That, oh, that's interesting. So
well, it isn't important.
Very
My wife
important.
Barbara was questioned by her physician, and it was a very important fact to get on the record, which is the name of this course is On the Record with Bob Cohn. It's very important to get that. Another term that's often abused is quote unquote Jewish blood. Human blood is human blood. There are various types that have nothing to do with your racial stock or your ethnicity at all. All these terms can be used and abused. And one of the purposes of this class is not to tell you what to think, but to encourage you to think about certain issues. And I always have a little trepidation before I come on to the attempt to teach one of these classes, but I always end up being grateful that I did not shy away from the subject matter. So Susan, are there any more calls waiting?
Yeah. David has his hand up, and Marilyn, I'm going to let David go first. If you both have brief comments, we have 3 minutes.
I'll keep mine brief. And Bob, the problem I have with banning books is who makes the decision and on what basis. And you know, we're seeing efforts now to ban books that might cause people to feel bad about themselves because of their race. You know, we just saw The Bluest Eyes by Toni Morris that was banned out there in Wentzville. You know, it's just wrong. I do agree that books may be age appropriate, but I also know from my own experience that I was reading much more advanced books than some of my peers were. And I think it depends upon the individual. And so I think it's a decision that the teachers and librarians need to be making about whether a particular book might be appropriate for their students or not. I don't think that we should be giving in to the book banners, or even worse, the book burners, as we've recently seen.
Well said. And they try to burn records of early rock and roll, and both rock and roll and literature are here to stay. And David, well said as always. You said, Susan, you said there was one additional comment to close out the class.
Yeah, Marilyn, you're the last.
Okay,
comment.
if I have time, I think that The Mao is a book that deals with profanity, nudity, and violence. Yes, it can be inappropriate for students and young people. But my question is, my feeling is, where do you stop? Once you start banning books, do we want to be like North Korea, Russia, China, Iran, where if you read a certain book or say something, that's it? I mean, no, where you just can't. You just have to depend on people to have good judgment and not allow young people to read a book like that. And one last thing. I don't know if doctors, and I know a lot of doctors, I don't know of doctors that ask that question about Ashkenazi, are you? If doctor asked me that, no matter what the reason was, I wouldn't like it. I would feel that it is just not the right thing to ask. Now, that's my opinion.
Well said. Again, I can understand that. There is the whole idea behind the HIPAA laws of not disclosing information without your permission. On the other hand, if it's a screening designed to make sure that you're aware of the fact that there is a genetic risk of a Jewish genetic disease, so-called, it's information that some people may want to have. I want to thank all of you for these thoughtful questions. And Susan, as always, for your expert handling of the mechanics of all of this and your own input. And wish all of you a Shabbat Shalom in advance. And look forward to seeing you in April, where we will be talking about leadership issues, perhaps involving Angela Merkel's 16 years as Chancellor of Germany and the current Chancellor of Germany, who doesn't seem to share her abilities or her backbone. What makes a great leader great, and why do some leaders fail? So thank you all very much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Bob. Excellent. Thank you, Susan.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Linda. Thank you, Linda.
Bye, Bob.